Hello, my name is Karie Bible. I'm the tour guide at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery and back again this week for yet another tour talk. So, lots to tell you this week and lots to discuss. First off, I do want to address that I am available for private tours in the month of June. You can email me or call me to book. It is going to be a very small group. You have to make a reservation in advance, and of course, the face mask and social distancing will apply. So, if anyone is interested, just find my information at cemeterytour.com. Now, last week, the minute I clicked the end button to end my live cast, it dawned on me I forgot to talk about close up. And frankly, I'm kind of surprised I didn't get a lot of angry emails at me this week for my failure to do that. So, for those of you wondering, yes, close up is fine and beautiful and shiny and great as ever. I know this past week was, I guess, what they call Hug Your Cat Day. And the one time I tried to hug close up, it did not go well. I don't know much about cats. I've always been a dog person, and I did not know you can't hug a feral cat. Who knew? I did lose a little blood, but other than that, I'm fine. And again, close up is great. He's a good boy, and he sure makes me happy. Alrighty, so this week there is so much to unpack. I want to start off. I'm going to do 3 stars this week, or at least try to. But the main star we're going to talk about this week is Miss Hattie McDaniel. June 10th is Hattie's birthday, so it's coming up in just a few days here. So I'd like to talk about her and about her cenotaph and what a cenotaph is at Hollywood Forever. Hattie McDaniel, I've got my notes here just in case I forget something. Hattie McDaniel was born on June 10th, 1893 in Wichita, Kansas. Her parents were former slaves, and her father was in the Civil War and fought for the Union, and he was very, very proud of that. Unfortunately, Hattie had a very rough childhood. She and her many siblings experienced very dire poverty and hardship, and it was incredibly brutal. But the McDaniel family survived, and many of her siblings went into show business, and Hattie started to become inspired to pursue a show business career as well. She started out on the stage, and Hattie at one point directed a play. She wrote comedy sketches, she sang, and she made her film debut in Hollywood in the early 1930s. And Hattie was a character actress. She co-starred opposite a ton of Hollywood's biggest names, including Katharine Hepburn, Barbara Stanwyck, Jean Harlow, Clark Gable, Bette Davis, Marlene Dietrich. She was in a ton of movies. And she endured a tremendous amount of criticism, even from within her own community, because at that time, the only real roles offered Hattie typically were the maid and the mammy. They were racist and obviously horrible, but at the time, that was all she was offered. And Hattie had a quote that said something, I'm paraphrasing, something to the effect of, I'd rather play a maid than be one. And Hattie really made the most of the roles that she had. She pops on screen. I've been at screenings to where she's only on the film like 5 minutes and the audience just claps and cheers and applauds when she appears on screen. And she also, I think, kind of subverted the roles, because if she was in a film and the actress said, oh, go get my coat, the white actress, Hattie would get the coat, and she would either stick out her tongue, slam the door, roll her eyes. She would put some gesture in there to let us know that she knew exactly what she was doing. And some people have even said to me today, well, why didn't she just fight for better roles? Well, unfortunately, things were not that simple back then. And if Hattie had gone into Jack Warner's office or one of the other executives and just demanded better scripts and better parts, she didn't have that kind of power. And the sad truth is the studio executives would have been like, bye, we'll find someone that looks like you, that does not cause us trouble, that does not make waves. So unfortunately, she didn't have the kind of power that, say, Bette Davis had, or Katharine Hepburn, or Marlene Dietrich. She basically did the very best she could with the times that she lived in. And Hattie knew she was blazing trails. She absolutely sensed this. And Hattie bought herself a beautiful, elegant house. Lena Horne once said it was the most tasteful and beautiful home she had ever been in. Hattie provided financially for her whole family, which gave her a tremendous amount of joy and pride. She was all about family. And she entertained the troops during World War II. She was on the Hollywood Victory Committee. She advocated for civil rights. Hattie really was a trailblazing person. And of course, her biggest role was as Scarlett's maid in Gone with the Wind. And Hattie would become the very first African American to ever win an Academy Award. She won Best Supporting Actress for Gone with the Wind. And even then, at the peak of her career, she still faced such an uphill battle. On Oscar night, she was not allowed to sit with the cast of Gone with the Wind. She was allowed to sit in the very back of the room with her escort for the evening. And she was not allowed to attend the premiere of Gone with the Wind, which happened in Atlanta. Clark Gable was friends with Hattie off screen and was so angered that Hattie was not invited to the premiere, he didn't want to go. But Hattie went to him and said, look, you really need to be there. So he did go. But Clark Gable and Hattie definitely had a friendship. And you can kind of see it definitely on screen in Gone with the Wind. They really had a wonderful rapport together. And Hattie, I just admire her so much. And I think one of the things I endeavor to do when I do my tour or do these talks and talk about these stars is to show you that there's more than meets the eye to people. Because it's easy to judge others, it's easy to take things out of historical context. And again, I think there's so much more to all of us than what you see on the surface. And there are two books. Of course, movie-wise, I would recommend anything Hattie is in, particularly, of course, Gone with the Wind. It's a great film. To me, I think Hattie is the moral core of Gone with the Wind. She's the only person in that film that sees the truth and isn't afraid to say it. And I know that film is very complicated and very racist, and I totally admit that. But I think that Hattie, to me, shines in that film, and it's worth seeing for her alone. And there's two books I would very like to highly recommend to you this week about Hattie. The first book is Bright Boulevards and Bold Dreams by Donald Bogle. Donald Bogle, for many of you who watch Turner Classic Movies, you're probably familiar with him. He is a frequent guest on TCM and also pretty much appears every year at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. He is the most preeminent African-American film historian, and he's written tons of books about Dorothy Dandridge, all sorts of different African-Americans in film, and this book in particular is a terrific overview, and it's so well done. It gives so much great historic context, and I highly recommend anything Donald Bogle has done. And also, this book, Hattie McDaniel, Black Ambition, White Hollywood. This is also a fantastic deep dive into Hattie alone, into her life, her career, and the circumstances surrounding all of the battles that she faced throughout her life, from childhood poverty to Hollywood to everything in between, personal and professional. And Hattie, unfortunately, got cancer and died in the early 1950s. And her final wish was to be at Hollywood Memorial Park, which is what it was named at the time before our current ownership in 1998 changed it to Hollywood Forever. So she wanted to be at the cemetery. However, the man who ran Hollywood Forever in the early 1950s was named Jules Roth, and he had a policy of not allowing African Americans to be buried there. So instead, Hattie was interred at Angelus Rosedale Cemetery. She wanted the highest spot in the cemetery. Unfortunately, she didn't get that. She is in a very flat, low spot in the cemetery right beside the front gate. And that makes me sad because that's definitely not what she wanted. Well, in 1998, our current owner, Tyler Cassidy, and his staff took over the cemetery, purchased it, and they've done an incredible job of bringing it back to life. Tyler heard this story and was obviously horrified at the way Hattie was treated. And he reached out to Hattie McDaniel's surviving relatives and family members and said, we'd like to disinter her from Angelus Rosedale, bury her at Hollywood Forever, all expenses paid for. The McDaniel relatives did not want to do this. And it's understandable. And Tyler said, well, this was a terrible injustice that we need to make right. So, as a compromise, Hattie has a beautiful pink marker right beside the water, surrounded by flowers. You can see the swans, you can see the pond. It's probably one of the most beautiful areas in the entire cemetery. And cenotaph is basically just a fancy word for a simple concept. It means the grave is there, but the remains are somewhere else. And that marker draws tons of Hattie's fans who leave flowers, even a miniature Oscar type statue sometimes. And I think Hattie really deserves a spot of glory. And I think that's a really beautiful tribute to her. So I'm glad that she has that there. And Hattie continues to live on not only through her performances, but through her work in helping pave the way for African Americans in film. About 10 years or so ago, the actress Monique won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for the film Precious. And in her speech, she said, I would like to thank Miss Hattie McDaniel for enduring all that she had to, so I would not have to. And I was happy to see someone from Hollywood's modern age acknowledge the debt to someone from Hollywood's past. And again, I recommend very, very highly both of those books I mentioned to you, Bright Boulevard's Bold Dreams by Donald Bogle and Hattie McDaniel by Jill Watts. So happy birthday, Hattie, as of June 10th. And by the way, later this evening, I'll be posting a ton of content about Hattie McDaniel on this page for you to check out. I also want to mention this. Hattie McDaniel, when she won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar, in the early years of the Supporting Academy Awards, they didn't give you a full statuette. You would pose with one for publicity purposes, but they gave the Academy Award winners at that time a plaque with a mini Oscar on the plaque. And later I'll post a picture of Hattie holding that. Well, when Hattie died, she donated her Oscar plaque to Howard University. And around the late 60s, early 70s, it went missing and has never been recovered. So there's sort of a mystery of Hattie's missing Oscar plaque that today remains unsolved. Okay, the next star I would like to talk to you about this week is Ann Sheridan. And Ann Sheridan is timely as well in that she is the star of the month on Turner Classic Movies. And there are a ton of her films showing all month long, so I wanted to bring her to your attention as well. What amazed me in looking into Ann Sheridan's life is that there is not a book about her. There's not a biography. There's not even a Films of Ann Sheridan book, which kind of really surprised me at the lack of major content about this great star. Ann Sheridan was born Clara Lou Sheridan in Denton, Texas in 1915. She was very beautiful from the early outset and even won a beauty contest in 1933. As a means of promotion, a lot of beauty contests happened in Hollywood in the teens, 20s, 30s. And many of these young girls would come out to Hollywood with the promise of a screen test or a bit role. And the vast majority of the time, nothing ever came of that. Ann Sheridan was definitely an exception to that rule. She came out to Hollywood in 1933 and began what would be a 30-year-plus career. And she co-starred in many films. Her most prolific period was really at Warner Brothers, where she was in The Man Who Came to Dinner with Bette Davis, Angels with Dirty Faces with James Cagney, I Was a Male War Bride with Cary Grant, Dodge City with Errol Flynn. And at the time, a lot of actresses were sort of given a moniker, like Clara Bow was the it girl in the 1920s. And then you had the sweater girl, Lana Turner, in the 40s. Rita Hayworth was the love goddess. Many of these women sort of had a moniker slapped on them for mainly publicity and promotional purposes. And a team of publicists dubbed Ann Sheridan the oomph girl. And she absolutely hated that moniker. And I completely understand why. I mean, on one hand, yes, the publicists kind of needed something to get them in the press and all of that. But when you slap a moniker or a nickname on somebody like that, you've really reduced them to just being a sex symbol or just being based on their looks. And all of these women had so much more to offer than that. And Ann Sheridan once said, "To hell with oomph." So she really, really hated that. And she was very diverse. She starred in comedies, dramas, musicals, film noir. She even produced one of her noirs, Woman on the Run, which, by the way, is available on Turner Classic Movies and from Flicker Alley DVD. And she really wanted to take charge of her career and find herself better roles. And of course, the challenge for many actors, and especially actresses, was adapting as they get older, when they're not the young ingenue anymore. And Sheridan was able to do that. She adapted, and at the end of her life was doing television. So she was still able to find work and to keep herself going. She also was a very popular pinup during World War II and really active in entertaining the troops. She even took a year off to entertain the troops at the height of the war. So Ann Sheridan was a gorgeous woman, but so much more than that. She really was a gifted, talented actress. And I highly encourage you later on to watch Turner Classic Movies. I will post later today a link that has the whole schedule for the whole month of Ann Sheridan films. And if anyone does uncover some information about her life or any books, let me know, because I've been looking this week and there just isn't that much out there. I talked to one woman named Karie Bible, who is a researcher and historian, and she told me she's done a lot of research on Ann Sheridan and told me that Ann was intensely private, which is really rare because a lot of stars in Hollywood's golden age, how should I say it? They lived large. They lived kind of lives that were out for public consumption, and there were a lot of scandals and marriages and just a lot going on before the eyes of the world. And Ann Sheridan was married 3 times. All 3 were actors. Only one was really well known, and that's George Brent. He was a character actor, really, at Warner Brothers. But there's just not a lot on her personal life. She really flew below the radar in an era where that was not exactly easy to do. So I really kind of applaud her for sort of keeping her personal life very private and just being able to focus on her work and her career. And Ann Sheridan, unfortunately, her cremated remains wound up at Chapel of the Pines. And Karie Bible joined forces with Tyler Cassidy, our cemetery owner, and a lot of other people to get Ann Sheridan out of Chapel of the Pines and get her a beautiful niche at Hollywood Forever. She is on the 2nd floor of the columbarium, which is right behind the funeral chapel. Unfortunately, when I do tours, it can be a little tricky for me to get back there simply because they are often having funerals, and fairly so. I have to respect that and avoid that area. But if anyone is able to get in there at any time, or if you want to try to book an appointment and we can try to do that together. But Ann Sheridan does have a great niche, and I think it does a great job of honoring her life and her career. And finally today, I wanted to talk to you about Herb Jeffries. Herb probably warrants a whole episode because there's just so much to say. But for right now, I'm going to use this as a jumping off point. Herb is interred at Hollywood Forever. He's on the tour. And Herb was an African-American singing cowboy. Representation matters. And Herb, there was Gene Autry, there was Roy Rogers. Well, Herb basically was the African-American Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. He starred in a handful of these films in the 1930s, including Harlem Rides the Range, The Bronze Buckaroo, and Harlem on the Prairie. These featured African-American casts, and it must have been really amazing at the time for people to see a hero that looked like them and a film with a cast that reflected their reality. And Herb had a fascinating life. He entertained the troops during World War II. He operated a nightclub in post-war Paris. He had a hit song called Flamingo. He sang with Duke Ellington and his orchestra. He traveled the world as a concert performer, a character actor. He was also heavily into yoga and healthy living and made it to be 100 years old. And I've met Herb's last wife. She was 40 years younger than Herb, so she's still around and with us. And Herb truly was a fascinating individual. And one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, the Criterion DVD has launched a streaming service called Criterion Channel. It's a subscription service where you can stream all sorts of classic movies, foreign films, get to see all sorts of extra commentary. It's a great service. And There was a DVD box set a while back called Pioneers of African American Cinema. Well, Criterion is streaming many contents out of that box set, including one of Herb Jeffries' movies, The Bronze Buckaroo. And as of this week, they have lifted the paywall, so you don't have to pay to see it, but you can go on there and discover the work of these African American film pioneers. And I really strongly encourage you to do so because I think knowing about this history, these artists, the struggles they faced, and the work they created is very important. And I think we could all benefit from watching the work, discovering it, and really opening our eyes to it. So hats off to the Criterion channel for doing that and making that happen. And I really hope all of you will take advantage of that resource and see some of these amazing and trailblazing works. And that's about it for this week. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, I really appreciate it. It's been fun to interact with so many of you. So if you have questions, if you have comments, send them in and let me know, and we will keep the conversation going. And I hope to see you all next week.